Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to the channel. My name is Sal, and today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different, more towards the strategy / educational type videos, not necessarily a slate breakdown. And I've gotten some questions about it, and I realized that just being in DFS for a few years now, some of the slang is maybe not really, even DFS itself, Daily Fantasy Sports, understood by a lot of people seeing these videos for the first time or just getting into DFS, researching it like you guys are right now and taking it seriously. So I wanted to talk about the difference between a cash game and a tournament game. Tournament and cash, that's the two big game types that are thrown out there. But there's more to it than just those two game types, right? You could break them down, and I want to explain to you the definitions of each, what the payout structures look like, how you should approach each one of them, or at least how I should, right? And see how you want to go from there. But let's just start with what they are. So a cash game is, and I'll do it right here on Draftkings. I have it a little screen share over my shoulder for you guys. But a cash game is going to be ones where it's a head-to-head, a 50-50. A double-up can also be considered a cash game for some people. But basically a head-to-head or a 50-50 where your odds of winning are basically around 50%, right? You have a higher chance of winning, an increased chance of winning. So in a head-to-head game, if we go right here, and this is just a random day. It doesn't matter the day or the sport even. We go to a head-to-head for $1. You win $1.80, right? If you win, the site takes that 20 cents, 10 cents from each person. It's called rake. So this is what it is. You're head-to-head. You're playing one other person. So there's two people in the field. If one person wins, 50% of the people win the money, right? Same thing for a 50-50. There's different sized 50-50 fields. It could be 10 people. It could be 100 people. If we go back to it, we can see right here, there's one for, it's a double up. So double ups also do consider those to be cash games. So we go 50-50s right here. You see this is just 6-person 50-50 and 3 people in the field win. So 50% of the field is winning, which means it's just more likely to cash, or at least it's 50-50, it's even to cash. But if you're somebody who's really into it and you're sticking up to the news, you're more likely to be above that 50% range over the long haul. So we compare that, so this is considered sort of like the safe route. We compare that to a tournament, and you can say tournaments here, usually featured are going to be tournaments, multipliers. You compare that to a tournament, we have the big tournament tonight on DraftKings, $10 buy-in, $100K to first place. So if you compare that to a tournament where there are 44.1 thousand people, and out of those 44.1 thousand people, only 9,349 get paid. So let me do that quickly on my little handy-dandy phone calculator. 9,349 divided by 44,000, and let's just say it's 100 even. So 9,349 divided by 44.1. Enter. Oh, bear with me for 1 second. And 44100. Enter. So in this tournament, we have just under about 21% of the field's getting paid, right? And usually in tournaments, you're going to see anywhere from like 18, and if you're lucky, 25% of the field getting paid. Now, compare that to what we just saw in a head-to-head, and it's a lot worse, right? 50% chance of winning in head-to-heads and 50-50s. Those are the cash safe game plays. Tournaments, you have like an 18 to 20% chance. This one, 21% chance. So why not just always play cash, right? And really, that's probably the optimal way to go. Guy like Adam Levitan, he only plays cash. He's very big into the Daily Fantasy Sports field. If you are starting out, you should be following him. And if you are following him, you know what I'm talking about. So playing cash games is probably most optimal. But you can see here, when you play cash games, you're going to be winning very smaller amounts of money. You're going to have to grind it out over the long haul, which again is possible. It just takes patience, things like that. Whereas if you play tournaments, all it takes is one night to maybe change your life, change your bankroll. Even if you're not winning that $100,000, if you're winning $1,000, that's something that could have taken you a few months to do playing cash games if you're just starting out, right? So the main difference in these games is just the way that you build your lineups, the payout structures, right? So we went over the payout structures. That's basically 50-50. You're going to split it. You have a 50% chance of winning in the cash games for the most part. And then in the tournaments, you're not very likely to win going in, right? A fifth of the field wins. On average, 20% of the field wins. So it's just a little more risky. So what does that mean? That means that you have to build your lineups differently for these two games. So if we go back to these cash games where we have the head-to-heads, and let's just say we want to enter one, right? And now this is going to come up with NBA, whatever it might be, right? But the sport doesn't matter. It's all the same way. Now, the way you build your lineups in the sport, that probably matters a little bit more in terms of every slate's different, trying to fit guys in at their salary prices. But the overall theme of cash and tournaments does not change, especially the way that you handle your bankroll. So, on this slate, we're looking at a cash game build here, right? So what you want to do is you want to get in high floor players. You want to get in guys who you could rely on to get you points. You only have to beat half the field. You only have to beat in a head-to-head one person. So there's no reason to go for those guys who are boom or bust type guys, right? They could either go off completely and help you out, or they could do nothing. You don't want that. You want the guys that are averaged out in the middle. Yes, you want guys that have that upside, right? You want guys that have a good floor and also have that upside. So an example of that for those of you that follow basketball, is Ben Simmons. Ben Simmons' whole team is injured today, so he usually has that floor, right? And he usually has that upside. Now he has an even safer floor with an even higher upside. This makes him an outstanding cash play. Now some of his teammates that were injured, they're going to have backups coming in, right? And those backups are going to usually be cheaper, and you're going to find your value plays. Value plays work in tournaments as well, but they're so valuable in cash because they let you lock in a floor. And what the floor means is just the bottom amount of points they can score. Say a player usually scores between 10 and 30 points, right? The floor would be the 10, the ceiling would be the 30, and then anywhere in between is what you're trying to work with, right? You're trying to lock in that 10-point floor as often as you can. When backups come in at value spots, that's great because you can lock them in at a cheap price, and then you can go all the way back up to these expensive guys, and you can lock them in because usually the expensive guys, they have a high floor, right? That's why they're expensive. They have a high floor and a high ceiling. So it's all about finding that value. And that's something that can be said for both cash games as well as tournament games, but it's just so important in cash because you don't have to beat the whole field. You can play those chalky players, and chalky just means a lot of people like them, right? They're very popular plays. And you can do that because you don't have to beat the entire field. You just have to finish in the top 50%. So that's the way that you go about building a cash game, right? You look for those high floor players that also have the upside, right? You still want to get as many points as you can, but not the guys that are boom or bust. You'll know who those players are if you just research a little bit, if you watch the sport a little bit. You'll know the guys who are basically consistent, right? You're looking for consistency there. As opposed to if we were to go back and try and enter a tournament lineup, the thinking is just extremely different. There's so much more that goes into it. I like to play cash, and I'll get into that, but I also love to play tournaments because the whole psychological part behind it that really nobody takes into account, but you have to take it into account. And it's the biggest part of it, right? So if we just go into a tournament here, there's a couple of different tournaments that you can go into, right? And I should talk about those. So this one is just a single entry you could see. And these ones are very smart to be playing in. So most big tournaments you can enter up to 150 times, sometimes only 20 times, but 150 times. There's a lot of professionals out there who enter all 150 times. Now, if you're somebody watching this and you're not entering 150 times, I don't enter 150 times as of yet. You're only entering maybe 5, 10, maybe even just one lineup. It's going to be tough for your one lineup to beat out some of these pros' 150 lineups, right? One, they're professionals, and two, they just have 149 more lineups than you, right? So it's tough to actually beat them out and place higher than them. You still can, just the odds aren't in your favor at that point. So what I like to recommend for a lot of people starting out are two types of tournaments. The first one is what we're looking at right here. I'm highlighting it. Single entry. What this means is exactly what it sounds like. Every single person in the field gets one lineup. So essentially, everybody's on that same playing field, right? You're only getting one lineup. You're probably going to see a lot more of the same types of players because you can't just have somebody throwing in 150 lineups and trying to get a little bit of everything. But that's fine because everybody's sort of on the same playing field now. Same thing applies, though, for these types of tournaments is if we look at the contest details, only 89 people are going to get paid out of 388. That's again around that 20% rate. That's what you're going to get out of any tournament, out of any GPP, which just stands for guaranteed prize pool. The money in the pool is guaranteed, no matter if it fills or not. Draftkings will pay it if it doesn't fill. The remaining amount of money, which is called overlay, which is what people look for so much. It's so hard to find on sites like Draftkings these days, though. So the single entry, the way that you would build this is, yeah, those safe floor plays, those are good to get, right? But if you just get a bunch of safe floor plays, you're limiting your upside. And in a tournament, you need to try and win those top prizes, right? We just saw only a 20% of the field is going to cash. But really, out of that 20% of the field, about 80% of the money, 75% of the money is in like those top 10 spots, if not higher. All the money's really tied up in those top 5 spots. The first place spots are usually so big. You really want to win or place in that top 10, top 5. So you need upside plays, right? And now this doesn't mean just go complete boom or bust, meaning that oh, half the time this guy gets 0 and half the time this guy does really well. Look for some sort of consistency, but also the upside that's there with them. An example of this, if we're going to just look on this slate right here, and we want to look at all the players if you're interested in NBA. If not, I could just break it down so it makes sense a little bit for you. An example of this could be a guy like Sabonis here, right? So Sabonis is a guy who he gets a decent amount of run. He's never really that popular of a play. As you can see here, he sometimes gets in the 20-point range. When he gets in the 30-point range, that's usually good. That's really like his average, a little better than his average. But he's a guy, like you can see right here, every so often he'll go for 46. That's a huge game. That's his ceiling type games. He'll go for 38, which is a little higher. So you can see that he's consistent. He's never dropping single-digit points. He's usually in the mid-20s to 30s. So he never really kills your lineup if he doesn't do great. But he has that upside to set you over the top. So you're looking for these upside-type plays, the guys who have higher ceilings, the guys who can propel a little bit higher. But let me make this very clear. You're not looking for bad players, right? You're not just trying to throw in guys like, okay, I hope this guy does well. No, you're looking for upside players who usually do well. And the biggest thing in tournaments, like I mentioned, the psychological part, it's called ownership. So what ownership just means is what is the percentage owned this player is going to be. So if a lot of people like on this slate a guy like Ben Simmons, say he comes in at 50% ownership, that means half the lineups in the tournament are going to have him. So the psychological part behind that is saying, okay, if half the people in this field are going to have him, do I also want to have him at that rate? Or if I'm entering 10 lineups, do I only want to put 3 Ben Simmons lineups in, only have 30% of it? Or no Ben Simmons in? Or on the flip side, I'll put 100% Ben Simmons in. Make sure this mic's still on. Because if you put 100% Ben Simmons in, then you're outweighing the field. So if he does do good, you're going to jump over a lot more people. The whole idea behind it, though, is determining whether you want to outweigh the field or fade a player or partially fade a player. And fading just means not playing them. And here's the thinking behind it, right? Say Ben Simmons is 80% owned. That's really high. Say he's 80% owned somehow. Let's just say that, right? And this is an example. If he's 80% owned on a slate, well, that means that 20% of the field doesn't have him, right? Just by 80% having him. So say that he gets you 100 points, which is very rare in the NBA, almost never happens. Just say he gets you 100 points for this example. If he gets you 100 points, he just smashed for you, right? But you're still competing with 80,000 people or 80% of the field. If it's a 100,000 person tournament, you're not like automatically winning because he just went for 100 points. He was so popular, you still have to beat 80% of the lineups. But on the off chance that he just doesn't do well, say he has an average game, or say he gets hurt, or just things don't go right, he fouls out, he gets in foul trouble. For the NBA, in football, he just gets injured. He's not playing well, right? He's getting stuffed at the line of scrimmage as a running back. Baseball, just not a good situation, right? If this person's chalky and they don't do well, you're automatically in the 20% of the field that can actually capitalize off of that, that don't need them. And then that 20% of the field in tournaments is like automatically cashing, right? Now, this is an extreme example, but the whole idea behind it is thinking contrarian, thinking about what the rest of the field is going to do, right? It's really just emotional based. A lot of people, if you can outweigh the field, get guys who are only 1 or 2% owned and they do really well, you're probably going to cash, and you're probably going to win a lot of money over the long term. So that's just what ownership is. It's just the percentage owned the player is in a tournament, and then consider fading or playing that player more than the field so you can get some sort of edge. You could also match the field. That's completely fine. And the field is just everybody else, the ownership percentage, right? But it's just important to keep ownership in mind, especially in tournaments. In cash, it doesn't really matter, not at all, unless there's a guy who's super chalky, but then just play him, right? So in cash, ownership doesn't matter, but in tournaments, it does. It's the most important thing, I would say, once you kind of know just how to build a lineup on DraftKings. So that's what a tournament is. So compared to cash, you're looking for those, again, high floor type players who do have some upside, but you're really just trying to maximize your points because you only have to finish in the top 50%. Whereas in tournaments, you have to finish in that top 20% right around there. So you're looking for more upside, more of those boomer bust type guys, but also make sure they're not busting completely so they kill your lineup. Make sure that they're busts. When they bust, they're still getting you a good amount of points, to whereas if somebody else goes boom in your lineup, you could still cash and potentially win a lot of money. So that's what tournaments are. Again, single entries are very good, especially just in general because you're on a level playing field. The bigger tournaments have a lot more money in them, and they're usually cheaper buy-ins, but it's like a lottery system, right? There's a ton more people in it. That's why the buy-ins are so big, and the professionals are going to enter 150 lineups. It's going to be tough to beat them. That's not to say you shouldn't be playing tournaments. You can take your stabs at tournaments, but this is going to get me and transition me into how you should approach it. So I usually play about 10% of my bankroll per night, and I don't have a huge bankroll. It's a few $1,000s now. And again, some of you might be starting with $50, $100, but this is the same strategy you can use. And you can alter it a little bit depending on how much you have. You can be a little more risky if you have less money, things like that. It depends on your risk tolerance, personally, really. So if you have $100, or let's just say you're working with a few $1,000s, whatever it is, I play 10% of my bankroll each night, and then I usually put about 8% of that into cash games, which are the ones we just covered. They're the safer plays. And then I put about 1 to 2% of that per night into tournaments, which are single entry things that we just covered. And another type of tournament that I'll touch on that I like a lot is just the lower stakes tournaments, right? They're cheaper to buy into. There's much worse players down there. If you're watching this, you're automatically better than them because you're putting extra time in. These are the people that they're going to put a quarter or a dollar in. Like, you can go all the way down here. This is a great strategy. Go down to the quarter tournaments, filter it. First place in this tournament is $600. 20 entries is the max. You can max that out for $5, right? You can max that out for $5. So if you're playing with like $100 a night, just max this out each night and then put in your other $5 into head-to-heads, right? Because if you hit that 600, you're 6xing your bankroll overnight. And if you hit a couple of these top prizes at once, you're just making money overnight. And again, these players are bad. They're going to play players who aren't even playing in the game, right? 10% of the field the other night played a basketball player named Julius Randle against me. I was playing in this same exact tournament. 10% of the field had him. He wasn't even playing. He was ruled out an hour before. Like, that's a lot of time to change a lineup in the NBA. So these are the tournaments I like. These and single entries that you should be taking advantage of. Now, I said 80% of my money each night, not my overall bankroll. I said I only play 10% of my bankroll, and then out of that 10%, about 8% is going to cash, 1 to 2% is going to tournaments. So that means that 80% of my bankroll that night, 80% of that 10%, is going towards cash games. The reason being is, if you're good, you should be able to consistently turn a profit over the long term. It's getting much harder now because much more people are getting good. There's optimizers and just ways for people who don't want to put the time in to actually make money, and that's completely fine. So still though, cash games, again, 50% chance of winning compared to a 20% chance of winning. You're going to win more often than not. If you could win at 55+%, closer to 60% of the time, you're going to be winning a lot of money. And then what I like to do is, again, I take those percentages that I win from cash games, and I use them as my 1 to 2% each night for tournaments. I put money into tournaments, and I use the single entry, I use the lower stakes, and then I try to slowly build my bankroll. And then sometimes I will enter those bigger tournaments like we saw, where the $100,000 prize, and I'll just take my shots if I like the slate, like if I'm feeling really good about it. A thing to note is, if you do have extra money and you do want to be taking like one stab a night into these bigger tournaments, whatever your like main lineup is, whether it's in cash, and again, that'll be a different lineup than a tournament, but if you're feeling good about it, or whatever your favorite lineup is that you put into some of these cheaper, lower stakes, lower buy-in tournaments, lower risk, then you should also throw it into that $10 one, only if you're going to be playing it anyways. Don't throw the extra money away. But it's going to be a pretty tough feeling if you end up winning this $600 tournament with the highest score of the night and you didn't have it in the $100,000 tournament, right? That's something you shouldn't do every night. You're going to burn through your bankroll then, but it's something you should do if you're feeling just really good about the slate, things like that. Or if you just build your bankroll to the point where you could take that hit, where you're building your bankroll to, if you have $1,000 in play in your bankroll, and you play 10% a night, which is a safe number. Say everything goes wrong for you, a guy gets injured in a lot of your lineups, you're only losing 10% of your bankroll, or even then you'll probably only lose like 8% of it. So, if not less. So, something to keep in mind is that if you have $1,000 that you're playing with and you're going to then take 10%, play 100 with it, say tonight, 80 of those dollars are going to go towards cash games. And again, it doesn't have to be 80. That's just what I've been doing. It could be 90 if you want to be really conservative. It could be 95. It could be 100% cash, no tournaments. Honestly, over the long term, that's probably the best way to rake out a profit. But those big spikes in your bankroll can come from playing tournaments if you play them optimally. And I have a ton of stuff about optimally. Contrarian is a word that I haven't used yet. Contrarian is just, again, when we're talking about ownership, it's fading, not playing those highly owned guys. It's just being contrarian and going elsewhere. I love the whole idea behind being an optimal contrarian. If you're still watching, there's a free PDF below in the description. You can check that out on how to learn to be more of an optimal contrarian in tournaments only. You don't have to be a contrarian in cash games. You just have to beat half the field, right? You can be pretty safe, pretty chalky, play all the same guys. So, if again, getting back to, if you have a $1,000 bankroll, you're playing $100 of that a night. This is just a way to bankroll management. You have $80 in cash, say $20 in tournaments. That $20 in tournaments, I would personally put it all into lower stakes. These max out these quarter fields. It only costs $5 to do so, and you have pretty good upside at winning $1,000+ if a lot of your tournaments lineups cash, high up at least. And you're playing just bad players again, right? You have just such a good chance at automatically beating 10 to 20% of the field just because they don't even start the right players. They play guys who are injured. But if you really want to take a shot at some of these bigger tournaments, like I'm about to filter to, where it's a $100,000 top prize, $10 buy-in, you could throw one lineup in there, you could throw two. Just know that you're probably, more times than not, you're going to burn that money just because even the pros aren't winning at an insane rate because each night only 20% of the field, 18% of the field is hitting, right? So that's the whole idea. I wrote down some notes. I just want to make sure I cover it all. So what do we got here? What we covered today was cash versus GPP, and GPP is just tournament, guaranteed prize pool. We covered the payout structures. Cash is 50-50. You're much more likely to win. GPP is around 18 to 23%, average around 20% of the time you'll win in those. Well, not 20% of the time you'll win. 20% of the field wins each night. So even if you're really good, it's tough to win, right? But with that risk of not having a greater chance of winning comes more reward when you do win. Lineup structure, we covered that. So for cash, you want to go over the high floor plays, right? You want to get those high floor guys, which just basically means consistent guys that you can rely on to get you at least this bottom number of points with the upside of doing more for you. You want to increase as much as you can the floor of your lineup by getting the highest floor plays in each spot. Now this is slowly starting to change in like the NFL because it's just becoming way more passing and you kind of need some upside guys, but at the end of the day, it's not all the way there yet. Continue to try and get those high floor guys in, find the value plays, and then in tournaments, you want to get a couple more boom or bust guys in, but not so much busting as in they're going to just get you no points, just so that they're usually consistent, but they have these peaks, right? Or maybe they're in a good situation tonight. Whatever it is in your data, that's something to look into. We talked about the game types, 50-50s, heads-to-heads or cash. Tournaments are guaranteed prize pools. They're also multipliers, which you really shouldn't ever be playing multipliers unless you're somebody who has a lot of money to blow. Only first place usually wins anything. And if it's a 100-person field, that's 1% chance of winning, and you're probably putting in a few $100s. So that's just a perfect way to lose money. If you have a ton of money, then go ahead and play them, but stay away from multipliers. I'd stick to 50-50s, head-to-heads, potentially sometimes double-ups, and then the small field tournaments, the single entry tournaments is what I like a lot, and then you could use some of those profits if you'd like to take a shot at the bigger field tournaments. Just know that it's very hard to win those. We talked about what boomer busts are. It's basically just, is this guy somebody who's just kind of like peaks and valleys? He either goes off or he doesn't, or you're looking for somebody more consistent. Consistency is what you look for in cash, as well as tournaments to an extent. You just want there to be a little bit more of an upside and a ceiling on them. We talked about ownership in GPPs and what it means to be a contrarian. You could drop down into the description below and check out, again, the PDF on being contrarian. Ownership is just how owned the player is in a tournament. Being contrarian is going against the crowd, going against what the public's thinking, because most of the time the public's not that great at predicting the outcomes, right? Because if they were, a lot of them would be making a lot more money. So going contrarian is just going against, with good reason. You don't always have to go against a good value play. I don't always go against good value plays if I think they have good upside. But ownership and being contrarian just means going against what the crowd's thinking. And then, yeah, so some ways to do that is just superstars in tough spots. Depending on the slate, you can just look at the ownership percentage and take a pivot to another guy who's just being overlooked. So, yeah. Try and being contrarian is all about being uncomfortable with your decisions, but not uncomfortable meaning you're being contrarian playing bad players. You're still playing good players. They're just being overlooked. They're in tougher matchups, whatever it might be. So that's cash versus GPP. It actually ended up being a pretty long video. I thought it was going to be like a 5-minute video. I hope that helped you. If you watched the whole entire time, drop down in the comments below. Let me know you watched this entire video. Greatly, greatly appreciate it. Let me know what you liked about the video, any advice you have for me. I do appreciate it. And if you watched this far and you're not subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button. It greatly helps this channel, helps me turn this side hustle, this passion of mine into a career. So thank you so much. My name's Sal. Peace.